For 5 long, endless years, my father had a name for me, a name I would hear in casual conversation at family gatherings and even whispered when I passed by him in the hallway. The family disappointment. Those 3 words weren't just words, they were a verdict, a sentence, a brand seared into my identity. They followed me everywhere, shadowing my every action, haunting my thoughts, and eroding any sense of self, worth I tried to nurture. It didn't matter what I accomplished. Good grades were shrugged off as luck. Praise from teachers or neighbors was met with a dismissive wave of his hand. If I tried to talk about my dreams, he would laugh in that quiet, cruel way he had perfected over the years. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" he would ask, as if a single comparison could erase all my efforts and my struggles, as if my very existence was a mistake in need of correction. I remember the day most vividly. A family gathering at our house, with cousins, aunts, uncles, and neighbors filling every corner. I had just won a small writing competition at school, something that had taken months of effort, planning, and late-night revisions. My chest swelled with pride, eager to share my accomplishment, tell them what you did, and my mother whispered encouragingly. I opened my mouth, words ready to spill, excitement dancing in my voice, but before I could speak, my father cleared his throat. "This," he said, pointing at me, "is my daughter, the family disappointment." Laughter rippled around the room, some polite, some cruel. I froze, my chest tightened, my heart thudded painfully like it wanted to escape my ribcage. My achievement, all my work, all my late nights and sacrifices, evaporated under the weight of those words. I tried to smile, to laugh along, to mask the tears threatening to spill. I nodded silently, pretending the words didn't sting, pretending I wasn't suffocating under the shadow of his judgment. Inside, something broke. A piece of me died that day, the piece that believed I could ever be enough for him. After that evening, I stopped speaking at family gatherings. I stopped sharing my victories, my failures, even my small joys. I learned that silence hurt less than hope. I learned that hiding behind a quiet exterior could protect me, at least temporarily, from his constant judgment. My younger brother, bright, accomplished, and adored, became the standard I could never reach. And I watched silently, as my father praised him endlessly, his pride and attention reserved exclusively for my sibling. I began to exist in the space between recognition and neglect. I did my chores, obeyed his instructions, and stayed out of the way. The world outside my father's scorn became a place of refuge. I would retreat to my room, pouring my thoughts into a diary no one would ever read, scribbling words and dreams that felt too fragile to speak aloud. I taught myself that the world outside his house could be kinder, but inside, every word he said cut deeper than any failure could. I often wondered if he realized the damage he was doing. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he thought calling me a disappointment would motivate me, but all it accomplished was teaching me to hide, to shrink, and to retreat. 5 years of this treatment left me exhausted, hollow, and desperate for freedom, a freedom I didn't yet know how to find. And yet, somewhere deep within me, buried beneath the hurt and humiliation, a tiny spark remained, a spark of defiance, a spark that whispered that one day I would rise not for his approval, not for anyone's validation, but for myself. Because even a disappointment can learn to become unstoppable, leaving home wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors or shouting matches, just a quiet resolve that finally broke through 5 years of pain. I packed a small bag, grabbed what little money I had saved from odd jobs, and stepped out of the house that had never truly felt like home. I didn't look back, not because I didn't care, but because I had learned that dwelling in the shadow of my father's words would only keep me trapped. The world outside was not gentle. Bills needed paying, jobs demanded long hours, and loneliness gnawed at me like a constant, silent ache. Every time I felt weak or overwhelmed, the echo of his voice calling me the family disappointment surged in my mind. I had 2 choices: let it destroy me entirely or use it as fuel. Slowly, I chose the latter. I worked nights at a small cafe, cleaning tables, making coffee, and serving strangers who didn't know my name. Exhaustion became routine. I walked home under streetlights, the cool night air washing over me, and in those quiet moments I allowed myself to cry soft, muffled sobs no one would hear. Tears were private, safe, and necessary. They reminded me I was still alive, still human, still capable of feeling and dreaming beyond the harsh words that had haunted me for so long. During the day, I returned to my studies, books piled on the small desk in my rented room, notes scribbled in every margin, assignments completed with meticulous care. I was determined to rebuild my life, piece by piece, away from the judgment that had once defined me. Every achievement, no matter how small, felt like a secret triumph, a victory unclaimed but mine entirely. It wasn't easy. I faced rejection after rejection, not just professionally but emotionally. Old friendships faded when they realized I had no family prestige or money. I learned to stand alone, to trust only myself. And in that solitude, I discovered resilience I didn't know I had. I became disciplined, I became patient, I became sharp, observant, and cautious, but most importantly, I became unshakable. There were days when I thought of my family, especially my father. I imagined him still standing in that same living room, repeating the words that had hurt me for so long. Anger bubbled up, yes, but it no longer controlled me. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. My life, messy and imperfect as it was, belonged to me, and I began to cherish that independence more than I ever had before. Slowly, I started achieving things that my family would never know about: a promotion at work, recognition from people who mattered, small financial stability I earned on my own. Every step forward was a quiet rebellion against the voice that had tried to diminish me. I wasn't shouting about my success. I didn't need to. The satisfaction came from knowing that I had risen without their help, without their approval, and without being held back by their narrow expectations. And all the while, I nurtured a quiet, secret plan. Not revenge in the conventional sense, not humiliation or confrontation, but a reclamation of dignity. I wanted a moment where my life, my efforts, and my victories could speak louder than words ever could. A moment when I could show, not scream, that the family disappointment was in truth unstoppable. Every scar, every tear, every night of silent struggle became the foundation of my strength. I realized something profound. It wasn't enough to survive. I needed to thrive, and so I did. By the time years passed and I was no longer just surviving, I was transformed. The quiet girl who once hid from her father's voice had become a woman whose presence demanded acknowledgement, not through anger, but through undeniable truth. The day I received the invitation to my father's 60th birthday party, I smiled. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was anticipation. The stage was set for something I had been preparing for my entire life, a moment where silence would become power, and my hidden strength would finally speak. It arrived on a crisp morning, slipping through the mailbox with the casualness of everyday mail, but carrying a weight I hadn't anticipated. A sleek, cream-colored envelope with my father's name, printed in gold, inviting me to his 60th birthday celebration. For a moment, I held it in my hands, my pulse quickening. Part of me wanted to crumple it and throw it away, to erase the reminder of the family that had spent years ignoring me. But another part of me, the part that had quietly rebuilt herself from nothing, felt a thrill I hadn't allowed myself in years: anticipation. I stared at the words again. Your presence is requested at a milestone celebration. Family attendance is expected. That word stung. They expected me to come, perhaps to apologize, to smile politely, to accept the shame they had long imposed upon me. What they didn't know was that I no longer answered to expectation. I answered to truth. I spent days preparing, not with dresses or makeup, but with strategy. This wasn't about confrontation or revenge in the angry sense. This was about reclamation, about finally standing in a space where my accomplishments, my growth, and my dignity would speak louder than words ever had. I planned my appearance carefully, not flashy, not arrogant, but confident, poised, and undeniable, Every detail mattered, from my posture to the way I would walk into that room. I wanted their curiosity first, then their attention, and finally, their recognition of what they had overlooked for so long. The morning of the party, I stood in front of the mirror, tracing the lines of my face that had once been marked by doubt and shame. Now they reflected determination. I dressed simply yet elegantly, letting my presence radiate authority without needing to say a word. The small purse I carried contained nothing but my essentials and the quiet evidence of years of hard work. The invitations I had received for awards, letters of recommendation, and a small folder of achievements that I would reveal only at the right moment. As I drove to the venue, memories of my father's words haunted me, sharp, cutting, unrelenting. The family disappointment. I repeated them silently, feeling the sting transform into fuel. Each mile brought clarity. This night was not about revenge in its cruelest form. It was about showing that the girl he tried to diminish had not only survived but had flourished. When I arrived, the grand hall was already filled with family, friends, and neighbors. Chandeliers cast warm light over smiling faces, most of which I hadn't seen in years. Whispers followed me as I stepped out of the car. Some were judgmental, some curious, some incredulous. She came. The disappointment is here. I ignored them, walking with a calm that belied the storm inside. Every step was deliberate, a signal that I had finally become the person they had tried to ignore, and then I saw him, my father. He stood at the center, the man who had reduced my life to a label for half a decade. His eyes met mine, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps irritation passing over his face. He nodded curtly, as if my presence were an obligation rather than a choice. I returned the nod, serene and unshaken. Inside, however, a quiet thrill surged. This was the moment I had been building toward, a stage set by his pride, ready for my truth. As the evening progressed with speeches, laughter, and the usual congratulations aimed at him, I felt a quiet anticipation settle over me. Each toast to his wisdom and success reminded me of what I had endured, and what I had quietly achieved. The room did not yet know it, but the story I carried was about to turn the tables, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The moment finally arrived. The air in the grand hall had grown heavier as more speeches were made, all praising my father for his accomplishments, wisdom, and generosity. Guests laughed politely at his jokes, raised glasses in his honor, and shared stories that painted him as the perfect patriarch. Meanwhile, I waited quietly, watching, listening, observing, the culmination of years of silent preparation settling like a warm ember inside me. When the microphone was passed around for any family members to share words, I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Whispers traveled like wildfire. She's going to speak. The disappointment. What is she doing here? My father's eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see the irritation flicker across his face. He thought I had come merely to nod politely, to take my place as the obedient daughter. He had no idea what I was about to do. I took a deep breath, walked to the center of the hall, and lifted the microphone. The chatter dimmed, replaced by an expectant silence. I didn't speak with anger, didn't shout, didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. I've been called the family disappointment for 5 years. I began, my voice calm but unwavering. I've been compared, dismissed, and ridiculed. I've watched my achievements minimized and my efforts ignored. I've carried those words silently, trying to understand why a father would reduce a child to a label, why a family would allow it to continue. Heads shifted uncomfortably. My father's face flushed red, and I continued. But I did not disappear. I did not fail. I survived. I built a life without your help, without your recognition, and without your approval. I worked nights, studied tirelessly, and created a future you never believed I could. Gasps ran through the room as I began to reveal my quietly earned successes. The promotions, the financial independence, the small but significant achievements that had remained hidden from family eyes. Every word carried years of dedication, each sentence a testament to the strength they had underestimated. And, yes, I said, pausing to meet my father's gaze, the investments, the ventures, the business that everyone praises my brother for. It was funded with my work, my savings, and my sacrifice. I never sought credit, I never asked for praise, but I am not invisible anymore. The room went silent. Even my father stopped shifting nervously, as if the words themselves had physically knocked the air out of him. He opened his mouth, perhaps to speak, perhaps to deny, but no sound came. His carefully constructed image of control and superiority cracked in that moment. I was never the family disappointment, I concluded, my voice steady and final. I was simply the daughter you never tried to understand. I handed back the microphone, turned gracefully and walked away, leaving stunned silence behind me. No yelling, no confrontation, just truth laid bare in front of everyone who had once believed my father's narrative. Behind me, I heard something I never expected: soft, uneven sobs. My father was crying. The realization of his years of cruelty, of his blind judgment, had finally reached him. But it was too late. The daughter he had tried to diminish had emerged stronger, unstoppable, and unshakable. That night, I didn't feel triumphant in the way revenge stories often promise. I didn't feel a fleeting pleasure in seeing him embarrassed. What I felt was freedom, the liberation of finally reclaiming my identity, my worth, and my dignity. The sweetest revenge is not humiliation. It is being undeniable, unbreakable, and fully alive in spite of the pain inflicted upon you. And as I left the party that evening, I knew one truth had shifted forever. I was no longer defined by his words, by his expectations, or by his narrow view of me. I was defined by my own strength, my own perseverance, and my own story. For the first time in years, I felt whole.